Welcome back to the Daily Dope Show. So this is a last minute update for you people in Michigan, my fellow Michigan people. Go to the polls on November 6th and vote yes to legalize recreational marijuana in Michigan. And I know, there's this regulation problem and the taxes and the licensing and all that stuff, and it's just going to be a nightmare and a corporate takeover and all this shit. I know. Of course I know this. I've been reporting on this shit for well over a year. In fact, well over 2 years. The My Legalized stories that happened in 2016. The medical marijuana takeover that the state passed in the form of the Medical Marijuana Facilities Licensing Act, which I say needs to be repealed because it was written by lobbyists who wanted to take over the medical marijuana existing business that was already running pretty good without any problems. We had high quality, tested in a lab cannabis at most facilities. You could have just made some rules. And still included the caregivers in this stuff, but you didn't. And now we're here, and we're looking at a potential gap in supply, and that's always a thing. I've been reporting about these gaps in California, Oregon, everywhere where they had medical marijuana laws before, but all of a sudden, here comes some new regulations, so rich people can come and take it over. And it's there's going to be a gap. You got all this old product, and then there's these rules that say that the product that you sell at the store that has a license has to be tested in a lab that has a license, even though these labs are the same labs, and a lot of times the tests has the same level of scrutiny, but somehow this weed just ain't going to work. But fortunately, that's not really the reason for the gap. The gap in Michigan is going to happen because where there used to be a medical marijuana facility to go buy your medicine at, now there's not going to be one there. Now they're gone. They're just not there. Yeah, there we go. Let's check this out. This is the Weed Maps Michigan map. I can't vouch for whether all these dispensaries on this map are actually licensed facilities or whether they have their license, whether they're in the process of getting a license or whatever other criteria you're going by. We do have deadlines, and the new deadline for any of these dispensaries that are still operating that aren't in the licensing process, they've already received cease and desist letters, and the threat is that they're going to be forcibly shut down after the October 31st deadline passes. So, knowing all that, we're going to read this article by Larry Gabriel of the Metro Times, Why Michigan Could Be Facing a Marijuana Shortage. And David Harns of the State Office of Licensing and Regulatory Affairs had these clarifications to add to how Michigan Medical Marijuana Licensing Board is handling supplies at provisioning centers. So this is, basically this story came out, and then this is an update. This story was published yesterday. This update was published today after Harns maybe looked at the article and decided that he needed to provide more clarification. So this is what this is, just to bring you up to speed. I was going to do this story last night, and I'm kind of glad I didn't, because this one last clarification kind of makes it makes it so if you are considering getting a job at one of these places and you're a caregiver now, this is information that might be useful for you. So, as reported in this week's Higher Ground, October 24th, Harns said, quote, if they give up their caregiver status, that means all the product that they bring with them can go into the state monitoring system within the first 30 days. As long as it's tested, they can still sell it beyond that 30 days. And he clarified that with, I was misinformed. Rule 4 of the October rules requires that any product not sourced through the regulatory supply chain has to be destroyed at the 30-day mark. This rule only applies to facilities licensed by October 31st. Anyone licensed after October 31st, Rule 20 of the May rules applies, meaning that they can enter their product within the 30 days after licensure, but it must be fully tested to be sold. Aha. The May rules and October rules are only valid through November 30th unless extended. So there might be some hedging on those dates. And I mean, from what we've seen so far, anytime that one of these deadlines approaches, as long as somebody applies pressure, Laura will probably change the date. But I mean, within reason, man. They've been bumping these deadlines back and pushing it back because they know that they're definitely churning this whole system that we had before upside down. And in doing so, patients are going to be the ones that suffer. Access is going to be terrible for at least, I'm going to guess at least the first 6 months to a year of this thing, man. So back to the article. The other thing Harns wanted to clarify was his statement, quote, "The only way that you can put a product into the license system is from a caregiver to a grower." So his further clarification is, quote, "Growers can do this, so that part is correct. It's a little misleading, though, as growers and processors can still take in certain marijuana products from caregivers who become employees until December 31st, 2018. Growers can bring in plants, seeds, and seedlings. Processors can bring in plants and usable material. So, growers are not allowed to bring in usable material. And when you're talking about processors bringing plants in, those plants probably, I'm not sure if they're talking about plants that just got picked or what, they're in the middle of processing. Again, like this, that's the problem with these licensing boards running things, is there's every time they come up with a rule, you can think around it with real life stuff that's going on and be like, well, what about this? And they never have all the answers. So huge problem. We need more people that know about what is going on to be advising these boards instead of the lobbyists that want to make all the money off this shit advising the boards. Back to the article, and that first sentence is technically accurate, the one about how, you know, the growers can bring in plants, seeds, and seedlings, processors can bring in plants and usable marijuana. But the way you put it makes it sound like they're literally, that it's literally the only way, which it's not until 12/31. So once, you know, yeah, and I don't have the answers to that. Again, like I just said, we don't know after that where all these products are going to come from, other than if licensed grow facilities are ready to go by December 31st. You're talking about the grower had to grow it, and then it has to get tested and processed at the you know, this isn't all going to happen by December 31st. I mean, maybe, but I doubt it. And I mean, maybe there's somebody that is going to have this all happening by December 31st, and they're talking to the people at Laura, but other people aren't, and people that just got their license or still are getting licenses for grows and processors, they're not going to be ready by then. So I guess that's some kind of cutoff for growers and I don't know. We'll see. This is all really confusing to me. So if it's as confusing to you, like, join the club. I think it's designed to be confusing. And yeah, here's what no wonder nobody out here understands what's going on with the licensed marijuana businesses. Folks at the MMLB, the board, don't seem to be very sure about what they're up to, so there's no way they can send a clear message. True that. But there's some important stuff that I want to get to, so let's continue reading. So if the October 31st deadline for unlicensed provisioning centers in Michigan holds, it will be the first hard deadline in the Michigan Medical Marijuana Licensing Board has maintained in its first year of operation. Folks at the state office say it's not going to be extended, but they said that about every deadline until just a few days before the date. But don't forget that the reason that the dates got extended is because their judges literally, you know, said, hey, we got to extend it. And they got the date until December But Laura came in and said, no, we're going to make it October 31st. So we don't, who knows what these deadlines are. But right now, as far as we know, and I haven't heard anything new, we're looking at less than a week is the deadline. Today's the 25th. We're talking about, October 31st. It seems like this one might stick. That's because the MMLB seems to finally be coming to terms with the idea that there needs to be a continuous supply available for patients. That logic don't make sense, but anyway. And while it still seems insufficient, you've got to start somewhere. Oh, he's talking about, okay, so there is, if you look at the map, I don't know why I keep doing that. If you look at this map, yeah, it looks like, sure, we're going to have, there's going to be supply if you go out looking. And I think Laura was the one they said, like, within a 30-mile radius, like wherever you live, there should probably be a dispensary somewhere within I think it was 30, maybe he said 60-mile radius. It seems like 30 is not really accurate, but there's a lot of dispensaries, no doubt. But do they all have enough? If everybody that needed to go to the dispensary tomorrow went to the dispensary near them, would they all have the products needed to handle that? There's no way right now, not currently. But yeah, it is insufficient, and yeah, they do got to start somewhere. But again, I go back to something that Radical Russ said a long time ago. He's like, man, when you're doing this legalization, and I don't even think Radical Russ really adhered to this after he said it. He just said it, and then later on he would be on the side of people crushing, whatever. Like, okay. But anyway, he said that you got to legalize what people are already doing. And if people are out there, they have a nice dispensary going in some little town in the middle of nowhere where they can't really afford a $48,000 assessment fee and, a $6,000 application fee that they might get churned down on. So, I don't know. If you don't legalize that kind of stuff, if you don't bring those people into the system, there used to be this word that we used when these things happened, and we called it grandfathered in, and you would have special consideration, like you would get something waived in the regulation or the tax or something so that you could operate still. But no, we're not going to get that with marijuana. Not medical marijuana, not any marijuana ever. You're just going to get, complete everything that you think is bad about not a free market. Like you would think that what the propaganda that they used to use to demonize communism back in the 80s. Oh, the state's going to take all control of the means of production, and they're going to come by and take all your crops when you're done growing them, and then just give you like enough to get by for 2 weeks instead of a whole year. And those were kind of scary things. Like, oh yeah, they're going to make it so. And this is kind of like what it is. It's like, oh, we just took the means of production away from the people and gave it to the corporate heads, the people that have the big money and can afford the big fees and stuff. As somebody that has been a caregiver for a long time, I've been a caregiver since 2010, so 8 years I've been a caregiver, working really hard, and you know what? It's like I don't have anything to show for it because I was never allowed to be like, oh, I'm making money. Let's do taxes. Oh, let me get a business loan. No, I was never able to do any of that. They made it in the law that, well, not in the law, but in the enforcement of the non-law, because the law didn't have anything in there, so that if you transferred cannabis from a patient to a patient or a caregiver to a patient that wasn't yours, you can go to jail for that. So it's just absolutely ridiculous that they're, oh, guess what, guys? Now we have these licenses, but if you were a caregiver before, there's no way you could afford to upgrade your facility to the level that you would need to have it at to even pass the inspection, let alone pay for the $48,000 assessment fee or have $1 million in an escrow account. They just simply, and like he was saying, they got all these confusing things to screw with people that really don't have time to, get into the technical details of these licenses. just filling out one of these licenses is so arduous that most people drop out before they even get into that process, or can't even get through the process because of a misdemeanor marijuana possession charge 10 years ago. It's the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen, and to leave these guys, Laura, in charge of the recreational marijuana licensing is a little bit scary. So, but I still say vote yes for that, because everybody will be able to grow 12 plants. And that's more important than any of this other shit. Right now, everybody isn't growing 12 plants. Even the people that could, because they're medical marijuana people, people just simply aren't growing. You know, it was people like me that did it when it was all the way prohibited, are the only people that still grow the shit. People that try to get into it because they think they can make some money, they usually get crushed. Or they're the greedy people that succeed and become, you know, these facilities. And I don't have a problem with these people sharing the space, but I do have a problem with them trying to kick us out of it. We should be allowed to go to the dispensary with whatever the fuck we got. We got extra weed, the overage, because if you look at the MMA, the original law from 2008 that lets caregivers grow for other patients and shit, it automatically makes it so we have too much stuff. And you know, you got to vote yes on November 6th, because then they can't just start kicking people's doors in and counting plants and be, oh, guess what, you're 2 plants over the limit, you're going to prison for 10 years and losing your ability to grow your own medicine. You know, we don't like, that's not what we fucking passed this law for, right? So this dystopian bullshit where you guys reinterpret everything to make it so that it weakens the ability for caregivers to even operate the way that it was intended that they operate. And you never seen Laura ever once, when they had their little meetings with people to discuss these rules that they keep mentioning, they never asked me about any of this shit. They never asked anybody like me about this. And if anybody like me had anything, was sitting on any of those discussions, chime in and tell me why you didn't advocate more for caregivers. All right? I've heard certain lawyers that are in Michigan, and I'm not going to name any names, that did stick up for caregivers and say that there's nobody in Michigan that's for anything to do with marijuana, recreational, medical, or whatever, that thinks that you should have set up this dispensary system and this licensing system, but not included caregivers at all. Nobody is behind that. It's ridiculous. So they did leave one bone on the table for caregivers, and we're going to get to that. And that's the most important thing about this video, in my opinion. Unless you are somebody in the middle of all this shit, you already know your fate. You already know what you're supposed to do and when the deadlines are. All right? You don't need me to tell you this shit. But if you have a problem with the deadlines, because you know it's Laura's fault that no one's meeting these deadlines, and if you are one of those people that are going to get pinched out of it because of that, then yeah, maybe you need to lawyer up or get your lawyers to go talk to some judges or something and figure out how you can tell Laura to bump this deadline back, you know, until they can get to you. Because that's what the problem is they haven't got to you yet. And now everybody that's going to get, you know, bumped to the next level of the process, are they going to lose money from the application fee? I know that they said, oh, if your application don't go through and you don't get your license, we can keep half of your application fee, which is $3,000. So it's just all around designed for people that lose to lose really bad and then get out of the business or get arrested. All right, so here's where we stand at getting a state system off the ground. On October 31st, all provisioning centers that are not licensed by the state must shut their doors. This is being described by the State Office of the Licensing and Regulatory Affairs, which oversees the medical marijuana program, as a move to get facilities that have not been advancing their applications to get their information in or drop out. According to Laura, there is numerous applicants that have not responded to requests for further information. There are quite a few that aren't moving forward with the process at all, says David Harns, communication director for Laura. And it's like I said, a lot of people that have dispensaries were going through the application process as much as they could to stay alive through these deadlines. And I think that's what he's talking about here. And I don't see I don't see a problem with that. It's just gaming the system to make sure you can ride it out until you can't ride it out no more. Can you blame them? It's $48,000 once they say, okay, we accept your license, now pay the fee before you can get your license. And the assessment fee is $48,000. I don't know anywhere else where you have to pay that kind of an assessment fee for someone to just, there's not a whole lot that they do. You can't justify that. There's no way. So the board's plan for now is that licensed facilities have 30 days from the issue of the license to bring their inventory into state compliance. That means they have that time to continue selling what they have on their shelves if patients are informed. Quote, you can sell products that wasn't tested as long as you have the person buying the product sign a waiver saying they understand that the product hasn't been tested. The understanding is that provisioning centers now get their product from caregiver overages. Wow. All those dispensaries were propped up until now and up until beyond now with caregiver overages. And you think that all those caregivers, what are they going to do after they can no longer take their overage to the dispensary? What are they going to do with that overage? Well, if you remember a story that came up in January, this is what they're planning on doing probably. They just pulled, like, I don't know, 54 out of 83 counties received a combined $1.8 million in medical marijuana enforcement grants in 2017, but in 2018 they applied and spent a combined, I mean, basically what we're looking at here is millions of dollars that they're using of taxpayer money. And the Department of Licensing and Regulatory Affairs has been sitting around on $34 million of application fees for people to be in the registry. You know what they've been doing with that? They've been kicking it back to municipalities for raid equipment and, to pay for labs on, marijuana tests and stuff. So anyway, after 30 days, those products must come only from state licensed suppliers and be tested at state labs. And here's the bone for caregivers that I keep talking about. Growers will also be able to buy seedlings and seeds from caregivers. I assume that means clones too. In fact, caregivers are the only officially sanctioned route for growers to obtain supplies. Seed banks are questionable. Now, this all comes from the author of the article, Larry Gabriel, again. That was his take on it. My take is that if they're defining a seedling, it is the same exact thing as a clone. So if they come in the door, kick the door in, and they're like, oh, let's count all these clones or whatever, then they don't care if it's a seedling or a clone. All right? That's called a seedling to them, to the legal system. Michigan did come up with a rule about 2 years ago talking about what is a clone, and that's, anything that has roots and is growing is a clone if it's planted. So let's see. Quote, the only way that you can put a product into the licensed system is from a caregiver to a grower, says Harns. The Medical Marijuana Facilities License Act does not provide any authorization or prohibition on growers obtaining seeds. So real quick, the Michigan Medical Marijuana Act provides protections for patients and caregivers for transferring or selling seeds to growers. And regardless of the source, the seed to sale tracking system has to note the origin of everything. So if I, as a caregiver, take some clones in and to a grower, I guess they have to go to a grower or a provisioning center. No, it just says from caregiver to grower. I don't know how that works. So I guess I would have to go through a grower to get it into the seed to sale tracking system. Maybe they'll have a new rule coming up about how we can just take them right to dispensaries, hopefully. I don't see why there's this whole idea of having to take them to a grower first. Anyway, the bottom line is that still doesn't seem like enough to cover what has been available to patients up until this point. There might be no way to be prepared for that. And it's also not going to account for all the income that those caregivers had when they were taking their overage to dispensaries. I personally wasn't involved in doing that, but to me that seems like a major way that they paid their light bills and shit. And being above board, like, hey, you know, at least I'm not selling, you know, out there in the playground to high school kids or whatever. Maybe there's an underground and unaccountable number of people in Michigan who are ready to vote yes on Prop 1. You think? I don't think it's really that underground. I think people are right out in front saying, yeah, we're voting for this shit. And I can't wait to see the immense level of landslide that this is going to be. So Michigan's Prop 1, with knowledge of the 10 years it's taken for the state to accept and set up a medical system that is still not yet fully functioning, mandates that the state begin handing out recreational licenses within 1 year. I don't really agree with that characterization of the medical system because it wasn't originally designed to be a system, and unfortunately it was supposed to be like, hey, we're going to leave it kind of open for interpretation so people can do things like make up, you know, legislation to legislate things like dispensaries and edibles and concentrates and stuff. But they never did that. It was a right-wing Republican-run government in Lansing, and instead of doing stuff like that, they had an attorney general named Bill Schuette, who you should vote against if you can, that basically, you know, tried to do everything in his power to kill medical marijuana. He even told cops, oh yeah, if you pull over a medical marijuana patient and you take their weed, you don't give it back to them. You'll be protected by, you know, us, and you can just say, well, you know, it's against federal law, so I'm not going to break the law and give you your weed back. So, you know, you give me a break. We needed to do stuff to get the law right, and they just used the open interpretation of it as gray areas that needed to be filled in by court cases and precedences. And we thought that those court cases and precedences would go our way, but we learned that they didn't go our way, because usually these court cases and precedences were done in counties and areas where there's still a lot of prohibitionists everywhere, because that's the way Michigan is. It's just full of prohibitionists. And they're not your government and your cops. They're your neighbors. They're the people that go to church. They're the people you see at the grocery store. As of last week, the state licensed medical or marijuana businesses included 29 provision centers, 9 growers, 5 processors, 4 testing facilities, and 3 transporters. Again, 29 provisioning centers, 9 growers, 5 processors, 4 testing facilities, and 3 transporters. These are just the provisioning centers. There is an interactive list. I don't know if I should have dug around more for it. I looked for it, couldn't find it right off the gate. So I was like, man, damn it. Like, okay, I guess I don't have it. But there is one. There's an interactive map that shows you where all the provisioning centers are. Not provisioning centers, but all the licensed facilities are. And maybe I'll dig that up and throw the link in the description still. Who knows? But meanwhile, that's what we have so far. Many of these provisioning centers are clustered in southeast Michigan, and that is where the bulk of the patients are. Oakland County has its first dispensary that the prosecutor and sheriff can't terrorize just for being there. Thank you. My God, that's where all the prohibitionists are. Responsible Michigan or whatever. And they're the lobbyists that wrote the Medical Marijuana Facilities Licensing Act. A bunch of people from the Republican Party of Michigan that were trying to take it over with a ballot proposal that just simply said, oh, and 10 people get to do all the provisioning and growing and all that stuff. And it's our buddies. Now those same 10 people just lobbied to make the rules for the new medical marijuana laws so that they still get to take it over. And that's what they're doing right now. And, there is some dispensaries that used to be there that are coming into the new system, but some of the ones that were there before aren't going to be coming into the new system, and it's ridiculous because they were some of the best dispensaries in Michigan. And whatever, man, and you can go into the stories of the people that started these businesses. They were the people that that were on our side, the activists. People that are doing this not out of greed but out of compassion. And you don't even see that very much anymore, man. This new marijuana takeover is just like the compassion is just getting stomped right out of it. And we don't even want to talk about the culture. All right, so there are at least 4 provisioning centers in Detroit with more expected soon. Oh, that's nice. I remember a time when there was over 100 dispensaries in Detroit. But the attack on dispensaries in Detroit has been happening. And it's not just because of, the overall state regulations. It's because Detroit just has a lot of problems in its government, to be honest. A bunch of people controlled by, not right-wing dogma in a political sense, but literally right-wing religious dogma. So there's that. I mean, that's all I got really on this update. It was really mainly, I just wanted to make this story so I can introduce the idea that, hey, in case you didn't know, they left one piece of scrap on the table for caregivers, and that's clones. Really into breeding too, so maybe you'll still be able to see some of my strains make it to the regulated system. That'd be nice. My strains have been in dispensaries before, and it's kind of cool to see, but it won't break my heart if I don't end up seeing any of my strains in any of these regulated dispensaries. I really don't. I don't really care if I have anything to do with any of this shit at all. And I hope eventually, between this and Prop 1 passing, that we have some kind of a reasonable amount of access to medical marijuana restored, and that medical marijuana don't fall by the wayside like we've seen it do in Washington, and as we're starting to see it slip in California and other places where recreational marijuana has basically taken over. All right, I'm out of here, guys. Peace. Tune in. Subscribe. And of course, go vote yes on Prop 1 on November 6th. Oh no, I got a strobe light back there. Sorry about that.